So the Buddhist point of view would be, if I understand it correctly, that everything is conscious, and that that this knee swelling and pain over time accrues consciousness. It becomes aware of itself, which is similar to my saying it becomes spirited. So it's similar to the Aboriginal point of view. It takes on a life of its own. Buddhists would say it becomes conscious. The Indians would say it becomes spirited. And over time, then we can begin to imagine that we could communicate with it. So in the Buddhist point of view, whatever the illness is, it has consciousness and intent, which parallels the Aboriginal point of view from both Canada and Australia and the US, that a spirit has consciousness and intent. And now we can begin to wonder what its intention is. In Tibet, they say that colds prefer rich people because they know that when the rich person sneezes, that the snot will go into a fine silk handkerchief. Whereas if a beggar sneezes, it'll just go onto the ground or a thorny bush. And so they say, all things being equal, a cold would prefer to go to a rich person than a beggar. It's kind of an interesting idea, isn't it? So this is Tibetan folklore. You know, this is what this is, this sort of story that everybody accepts as common sense in Tibet. And I thought it's kind of interesting because it parallels the studies that show that people in the third world have a lot less asthma, almost none in fact, compared to people in the first world who have a lot of asthma, but no worms. So I guess your choice is worms or asthma. I think I'll pick the worms myself. I'll take a little worm over some asthma. I can always, go to the witch doctor, right, and get a brew for the worm, but I don't know about the asthma. So, so what we're after then is a sort of phenomenological description of the story of the illness that allows the spirit behind it to emerge. So, so we're after a story that will permit the spirit to appear. And it's easy to talk about the spirit behind, say, hepatitis C. We can put on our biological hat and say, well, that spirit is a virus. But if we're actually telling, if somebody with hepatitis C is telling their story, it often turns out that the spirit is a little different from the virus. That it's not just the virus, it's more. That the spirit, in a sense, is collaborating with the virus. That the consciousness of the virus is being directed in some way by the consciousness and the intent of the spirit. And what I'm suggesting is you have to construct this for every individual case. So every individual illness has its story and has its spirit, has its consciousness, its intent, and has to be pulled out, which is why we have to get a good story for any illness. We need to understand the story so we can know what might be helpful. If we don't know the story, we don't know what to do. And I think even if you're a biomedical practitioner, knowing the story helps you to know what to do. Though though I guess I have a bias. My bias is that purely biomedical therapies never work completely. That's my bias. And lucky for them, people spontaneously transform sometimes through illness. Luckily for doctors, allopathic doctors, probably homeopathic doctors too, luckily for physicians, spontaneous transformation happens. And sometimes people say, you've all heard people say, that blank was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? So it's most interesting when they say, that cancer, you know. And I know people who say that. And whenever someone tells you that story, you know, my response is always to like, wow, you know, that's something. Because it goes against my training. I'm still trained, you know, and when I have that sort of shock of recognition, I say, oh, medical school is still in me, you know. So, and this is both the Aboriginal and the Buddhist point of view, is that sometimes illnesses are attracted to you. Sometimes the spirit that fuels an illness is attracted to you to assist you in some meaningful way. That it's not always a curse. It could be a blessing. And there's also the perspective that you're entitled to turn a curse into a blessing. That's something you can do. You know, it's sort of like making meaning. It's like changing story. So that's what's, you might think of cancer as being a curse, but somebody might then turn it into a blessing. And I think we all have different thresholds for what we're willing to be challenged by to grow. I prefer to be physically healthy and keep my challenges financial and relational, and not have to deal with physical illness. But I know a lot of people that would prefer to have enough money and a stable relationship and be challenged with illness. That's more acceptable to them. And I'm not sure how I get that. I'm not sure how that arises, but I suspect that if you reflect on that for yourself, you'll find that certain areas are more acceptable for you to work out your growth than others. Can anyone relate to that? Can you see that we all have different thresholds of acceptability in how we can be challenged? So, so what we want to do is we want to elucidate the spirit behind suffering and pain, behind someone's suffering and pain. And it could be one spirit, or it could be several spirits. It could be spirits in collaboration. Once I did a ceremony with a group. Hang on, let me finish this thought. Once I did a ceremony with a group in which the supplicant, the person who wanted to be healed, had what he believed was Lyme disease. And so someone volunteered to be the vehicle for the spirit behind Lyme disease to enter and talk to us. And so the chief spirochete appeared and spoke through this man, and his name was Borrelia burgdorferi. And in this particular situation, the presentation was that the chief of the Borrelia burgdorferi, which is the spirochete that supposedly causes Lyme disease, was behind this sickness.